So next up, without further ado, I'm going to get to the main event. I've been waiting on this one for a minute. Dr. Michael Thomas, the floor is yours. Please introduce our program for today.
Thank you, Rodney. And it's great to see everybody. And I'll tell you, I just had a proud dad moment when I watched Emerald's story. You know, as a superintendent, 25,000 kids, you take it real personal. And to see her continue to grow and find success in her life, that was just beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Today, we have Ms. Tambi Tyler, who is joining us. She is the president and headmaster of the Colorado School. And she has over 20 years of experience in education, hailing from the Midwest, coming through the South, and then back over to the West. She's had a variety of roles in education, literally entering in as a paraprofessional and then working her way to her leadership where she currently resides now. And I'll tell you, she is a person with an amazing, beautiful spirit. We have connected. She's in the private sector of education. I'm in the public, but nonetheless, we believe in the high tide of education of all of our young people to really carry on the generations to come. And it's just an honor to have another great leader right here in Colorado Springs to really help affect change on our young people. I do know a fun fact about Ms. Tyler. Well, maybe it's not directly about her, but we've got a couple of Rotarians who have a connection to Ms. Tyler, and I believe Mike McGrath possibly on the board or has served on the board currently, or is that currently or in past, Mike?
No, that's currently, and
okay.
I'm very proud to serve on the board.
All right, and don't we have some others, Mike? I thought there was one more I was made aware of. No?
Hey, Bill Nelson, it's time.
Nelson, yeah.
Where's Bill?
Where's Bill?
I don't see him on my screen. Well,
I'm here.
nonetheless.
Bill's asleep. He must be asleep.
Yeah,
No,
right.
I woke up. I'm here.
There he is. There he is. So again, just our Rotarians, again, giving back to the community by way of supporting, you know, Ms. Tyler's leadership as well. So today we're going to hear from her, specifically looking about how she is leading through some real challenging times and what the future holds, you know, for her school as she continues. You know, this is you're completing your first year, and what a year to remember. So it's my honor to present Ms. Tambi Tyler to our Rotary group this afternoon.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So I wish I was in a room with every single one of you. It's really, really hard to connect virtually, and my spirit and love for people is a little bit enabled by my new technology look. I'll tell you a little bit about the hats I wear first, because I think that's important. I obviously am the head of school at the Colorado Springs School. Based upon that slide you see there, we are in the 80906 zip code. But the hats that I wear are mother. I have two grown children. You may even be able to see one over my shoulder. That's my currently 23-year-old daughter. And I don't know if I move out of the way, you might be able to see my character over there. That's my son. My baby is 21 years old. And my other baby, who's sitting over here staring at me, is my 16-year-old schnauzer who gets more sleep than I do. So that's kind of my family. I want to first thank you, Rodney. Thank you, Michael, Mike, Bill. Those are the people I know I have connection with, and I'm hoping to have more connections with more Rotarians. With that being said, I'm going to start with a poem that I think I usually use in person because it speaks to my heart and it speaks to my spirit. Into the crashing sound, into wickedness she cried. No one, no, nor no one, millions of ones dare deny me. God, I go forth along and stand as 10,000. The divine upon my right impels me to pull forever at the latch on freedom's gate. That is basically the words of a great national poet laureate, Maya Angelou, from a poem called Our Grandmothers. Though Maya in that particular stanza is speaking of grandmothers in the actual prose, the grandmother figure that she's talking of is really a host of folks, the many ancestors, mentors, supporters, prayer warriors, family members, and collegial dream sponsors that have contributed to everything and an achievement that she's made. And I myself call upon those figures, a grandmotherly figure with the strength of 10,000 people when she's defending herself, her children, her faith in God. And in fact, Oprah also sometimes paraphrases it by saying, I come as one, Tambi Tyler, but I stand as 10,000. So I want to give homage to all of the many people that make it possible to speak with you. I really want to start today by kind of giving some of the embodiment and strength that has gone into it. So each day, educators go through the school door having to somewhat defend themselves, their children and their faith in a system that must provide kind of the knowledge and the skills of the next generation. So the joy of learning is still present despite COVID. And although right now school leaders are taxed beyond measure, there are so many different and beautiful and amazing things happening since like the video that we just saw, that both virtually and in-person classrooms, despite the historical pandemic, we're still doing education. So on the behalf of all of those, the students, the faculty, the staff, I want to thank you for this opportunity, but then I also want to get more into this topic about education in COVID times and how we can continue our goals to teach and to educate in spite of the deadly pandemic. So to all of you who are here, I want to say thank you. I want to say this technology venue is going to be challenging for me, but Rodney's running my screen, so I have the ultimate faith in him. So this will be just fine. So we at the Colorado Springs School are mission driven, and we earnestly believe that through our mission, through superior academics and mentoring, the Colorado Springs School prepares students to think independently and to meet the challenges of a dynamic world with leadership, ingenuity, problem solving, and personal integrity. We've been actively pursuing and trying to hold to our mission around this rapid change that the coronavirus has presented us with, and actually has forced us to change the way we do things. So both the way we do things here at home, at work, and at play. So in part, our central focus and what I plan to share with you today is from an educator's perspective of some of the questions we've had to wrestle with. So question number one, just how do we tackle education during the worst pandemic in a century? Do we execute education through e-learning? Do we execute education through hybrid or an a la carte modality? Do we execute education on campus, or do we do all of the above? That was the first amount of questions. And those are just some that educational leaders are currently facing, both in the public system and in the private. So some of them we found answers and solutions, and to some we are still grappling. There isn't a manual, and the uncertainties are great. Despite the uniqueness of our budgets, our resources, and our composition, some of the fundamental questions of how to educate students during this pandemic are still there. So we're looking at some of the same challenges, but albeit in different ways. Our students, faculty, and staff members, and the school's leadership team have been working tirelessly to support families and our school community with commendable and sometimes outright remarkable persistence. I tip my hat sometimes at my teachers at their heroic efforts. They showed up. We walked on our campus in September, or in August actually, and we were walking out into an uncertain pandemic. Despite the pressing dangers of the outbreak, our educational leaders, they were standing there in the face of uncertainty, and they braved their classrooms where an active virus could infect and severely impact their day-to-day operations. So as the head of school, I can't say enough on how much I appreciate my teachers and respect and love what they do and what they're doing for children. Earlier in my school year, I quoted a headmaster of another school who says often, education is change, and it truly is. But you know what? This may or may not sound too profound, but change is difficult. Never before has education had to change so rapidly and so often. Schools are reeling with uncertainty and ever-evolving plans. As we look at the current landscape of education in the past several months, schools across the country, and of course, across Colorado Springs, have made plans, and we've changed plans. We've reconstituted our makeup and are incurring thousands of dollars, if not millions, of expenses, and all the headaches that come with the implementation of those plans. Remember, our schools are simply just a microcosm of society, our community, and our world. As the world juggles with the historic pandemic, life as we know it has changed. So thus far in schools, we are changing. Today, just reading in the papers or watching the latest news outlets, it's more than evident that the change is not even over. We're in a constant state of change. For example, some of the data sets that reveal that crime during the pandemic has required law enforcement, healthcare professionals, and yes, us educators to take a non-traditional role. Our heroes are having to be superheroes right now. Another indicator comes from the FBI. It reports a drastic jump in arson nationwide, up by 19%. And there's also the worry about increased attacks on children. With so many now forced to school virtually from home and online, children are at risk of exploitation. And while our focus at the Colorado Springs School is on the children we serve, we're not inoculated from the fact that their parents and others are becoming easy targets for hackers and scammers and are also facing their own uncertainty. The experts tell us that since the pandemic began earlier this year, online fraud is on the rise. And as the economic condition of many Americans is impacted by the pandemic, the other societal derivatives include increased incidents of domestic violence, growing concern about child abuse, suicide, and homicides, just to name a few. And during the pandemic, we also held an election, one of, if not the most, divided in our country's history. So change right now, again, is difficult. So relationships between neighbors are also strained, and the commitment to understanding the difference of opinion without becoming violently angry is like an LED light that starts flickering to let you know it's about to go out. So where does this leave education? I want to, if you will, take a journey with me. In 1962, the founding year of the Colorado Springs School, Dr. Thomas Kuhn introduced a concept identified as a paradigm shift. In the book titled The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, I found this concept absolutely remarkable. It actually is where I feel we are today, in the midst of a paradigm shift. So Dr. Kuhn explains that a paradigm shift is different from a mediocre change or a mild alteration. He describes that during a paradigm shift, new information is received that changes how we see all other information around us. I'll give you an example, genetic codes. So DNA, this injection of new knowledge would affect all other information that kind of comes after it. So the typography of medicine, criminal justice, all altered by the entrance of this new information. Some criminal cases have had to be retried and continue to be retried with the use of DNA technology. To understand if someone actually committed the crime, you have to figure that out with your DNA, with your new information. So although the same situation was presented, a different lens was applied. Another example of change, the power of leaning into uncertainty a little bit, is the introduction of the World Wide Web. Drastically changed how we do business, a paradigm shift, right? Remember when we thought it was super different to kind of buy something online and then get it delivered at home? So receiving something that changes how you see something new is like walking out into the sun and having your vision obscured. The road is still there, all objects are present, but how you see them is altered. So at this time, Rodney, would you do me the biggest of favors and show the duck or the rabbit, if you will? So if you would kind of go on this little journey with me, take a look at this photo and tell me, what do you see in this image? How many of you, and Rodney, I can't see everybody, but you probably can. I don't have to because I'm still trying to follow my notes a little bit. But tell me how many of you, by show of hands or even in the chat, if you could just put in, I see a duck or a rabbit. Which one do you see? So quickly in the chat there, if you could just kind of reel it in there. Do you see a duck or do you see a rabbit? Or you could potentially see both.
I see both.
Ah, who's that? Who said that?
Dwight Johnson.
Ah, nice. Okay.
Duck first.
I see some duck people. I see both. Nice. Duck at first. Duck at first glance, then both. Got it. Perfect. So technically, you're right. If you just look at first glance, you might see the duck. How many of you, I cannot see anything other than, okay, I see, wait a minute. Katie says I see duck. So if you look on the left-hand side, I see duck. If you take your eyes and push them to the right-hand side and see it the opposite direction with the eye pointing the other way, I bet you'll see the rabbit. Try it out, those of you who see only duck. Okay, so you see, it depends on how you look at it. Same drawings, same etchings. However, you know, what you see all depends on you, right? And how your perception is. So the difference between you and I is that we perceive the same things differently. This is where we are on the many aforementioned items. So criminal justice, civil unrest, education, politics, the pandemic. The radical and dramatic changes and pivotal moments that educational leaders have had to make has been a result of this type of information that's presented to us in a short amount of time to make pivotal decisions that affect the lives of others. And this, my friends, makes change all the more difficult because of the way people see it. So I personally, I'm going to go back to my story. I arrived in Colorado Springs during the pandemic, and then I began my leadership at the Colorado Springs School on June 15th. While scientists in every corner of the world were actively researching and trying to learn about the novel coronavirus, at our school, and like so many others, we had not received any guidance or protocols from the local health officials. And all school leaders then and now are still facing lots of questions and very few answers. So as we look at the pandemic and what it was requiring of us, we had fundamentally a very short runway to prescribe and execute sound solutions to keep everyone safe while still trying to conduct learning. In any normal course of action, upon arriving to lead a new school, of course, my first steps would have involved like just getting to know the families, understand the makeup and the concerns of the community, and then of course, seek to spend time with my students and become closely acquainted with their profile and positions within the school. However, as the pandemic raged and civil unrest was being viewed across screens on home television sets, computer monitors, laptops, and mobile devices, I instead had to saddle up for a bumpy, forward-thinking, and at times a completely blind ride of decision-making. The leadership team and I were just getting to know each other, and I was embarking upon reopening the school during a dangerous and deadly pandemic. And we are an intentionally small school with a hallmark of experiential learning that depends heavily on the outdoors and what it means to the world around us as our teachers use the outside to teach and travel has halted. We embraced outdoor education and began making plans to have some covered outdoor classroom spaces for teachers to teach classes. Leaning into the uncertainty doesn't mean the lack of opportunities. So we said, outdoor ed, we'll do it right here. We're a 24-acre campus with 10 buildings. So we were making do. All the while, my parents wanted to know, what are you going to do when it gets cold? We developed a COVID-19 task force. We composed that of our dedicated school community doctors and parents, and of course, Dr. Leon Kelly. We conducted safety walkthroughs to view our buildings and classrooms, and relied heavily on the guidance of that COVID-19 task force to structure the school day, which meant our schedule underwent a complete and total overhaul in order to accommodate fewer students in the classroom. And just as we got closer to the arrival of our teachers and our students, we faced a hailstorm that I have never seen before. I felt like there were small people being thrown from the sky. I'm getting used to Colorado because it damaged most of our campus buildings and some of our roofs. That was just before school started. Welcome to Colorado. But despite all that, we continued to move towards the goal of on-campus learning. So on-campus required 6 things from me: smaller classroom sizes, additional cleaning protocols. I needed to have outdoor air moving or circulating, or I would have to change ventilation requirements. I had personal protective equipment purchases to make. I was about to make my teachers look like full-time doctors. We had the demolition of a wall to expand some of our classrooms so that social distancing could happen in certain places. And then of course it was the outdoor classrooms that we so heavily relied on. As we pursued on-campus learning, we realized that parents and students were facing their own set of challenges too. So some were clear that they did not agree with on-campus learning and they left the school. Some were experiencing the well-known challenges of long-term e-learning or virtual learning from the spring, and some noted that their child had been facing setbacks in learning, amongst other things, mental health concerns, or just an overall withdrawal from their own family dynamics. Some of the challenges that our families were facing, I'll give you one of them. At the start of the pandemic, Asian students were experiencing online racism and targeted attacks. Second thing, Black and brown students across America were realizing the divide in healthcare and the racial disparities that came along as factual elements of the pandemic were affecting Black and brown students and their families. Some were losing family members. Some even felt the fact that they were feeling marginalized even more so as racial unrest was playing itself out in the streets. Number 3, in-person healthcare for routine visits had come to a halt. So students and their families were struggling to provide a response to just a routine checkup. Number 4, even larger, unemployment had hit a record high. And whether you were the owner or the employee, your bottom line was changing and going from black to red, and your overall income was dramatically impacted. Number 5, early childhood learning during such a developmental time was proving challenging for students with learning disabilities. For some, learning came to a screeching halt. And then lastly, access to learning. We had to look at internet tools and resources became scarce, and on an irregular basis, some students were able to get educated and some were not. As schools made decisions about returning to school, parents were juggling their own uncertain reality. And at the Colorado Springs School, we finally received the public health guidance around July and continued to have our students on campus beginning August 24th. If you'll do me a really quick favor, Rodney, there's a slide that comes up next, and it shows you where the public health guidance what it looked like back then. So if you take a look at this, and I don't know if you can see it or not, but because this was last month, but on the far left is what April, probably May, our COVID-19 El Paso County public health record looked like for COVID-19. And when you look at that, you probably want to think to yourself, what were we worried about back then if the numbers were that low? So we went ahead and started not knowing what was going to happen. But the data in the El Paso public health surpassed the numbers really quickly. But if you look at summer to now, so on the far right is where we are right, or where we were in November. I think it may even be larger than that now in December. I don't have the current one, but now we're looking at the spike. And so that's where we were in the summer when we started school. So the mental and the physical stress of moving forward each day, it weighed heavily on our parents and our faculty and our staff because we didn't have this outlook at the time. We were consistently making pivots as the virus affected families. So we noticed that our upper school or our secondary students were finding that COVID-19 was happening more so than with our primary age students. And so we were pivoting between an e-learning status and an on-campus. We have a health coordinator who we started to have available to do all of our contact tracing for us. We were getting phone calls in the middle of the night saying, okay, here's where we are for tomorrow, and giving information to families at the absolute last minute, but actually not in the last minute because it was when we had it. And so we were very much so in an uncertain space and have been since the start of school. So the mental and the physical stress of moving forward, again, heavy. We were consistently making pivots. We're still making pivots. We noticed that that the forced quarantines, they don't work. Telling someone to just stay home for 14 days because we're the school officials and we say so, it doesn't mean you're not going to have a Halloween party. It doesn't mean you're not going to travel. And so we were very quickly being able to realize that we could only control so much. So school leaders across the country are actually realizing that we're all at the mercy of the virus, every single one of us. So for our purposes at the Colorado Springs School, we implemented a community pledge. And at the start of the summer, we were asking every parent to take a vow, a robust response to what it means to be in the pandemic together. However, as the winter months quickly approached and Halloween and all of the other seasons happened, we really had to realize that we're not in control, the virus is. And so now some of our schools are completely remote once again. We're all back in that same situation as we were in March, if not worse. And now all of the restrictions are even greater. So one thing as a school leader that I was up against and still am are the changing variables. How do you plan when things are beyond your control? So we look to science, we look to research, we look to proven experience and our collaborative teamwork to guide us. And we're continuously trying to communicate with our families, but yet remain cautious in our attempts to predict the future events or to overreach and try to overstep our bounds to control their families. Each variable presents another potential concern. And no matter what we do as educational leaders, we know that we cannot make all of our families happy. We know that one change, one decision can make the masses completely upset or indifferent. Leadership demands that we look at all the variables, weigh our priorities, and think long and short term. But no school leader in the independent or the public sector can maintain their budget and prepare for what ultimately is an infirmary-style educational setting. The budget busting actions that we are forced to make have each school leader looking for goodwill and looking for charitable gifts. No school leader in the independent or the public sector can make a decision and then communicate those decisions without like experiencing another variable that could potentially change everything. So the uncertainty brings opportunities, but it also brings stress and it brings imbalance and continued planning that stretches well into your early morning hours, and your work hours are no longer yours. For example, in the current predicament of the pandemic, if contact tracing brings information in late evening, then I'm responsible and I'm up and immediately keeping everyone abreast of that. Never before have educational leaders had to do this supreme decision-making that literally is almost a matter of life and death. So now this may sound like an alarmist thing to do with some facts and figures, but just go with me for just a little bit. Since January, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says that there are more than 13 million cases in the United States. From that, some 270,000 deaths. And I know we've come to now just consider this number. We've lost, I think, some of us, the sense of shock and awe over the sheer unbelievable amount of death. So I'm going to do another little bit of an experiment with you. And I know I can't control your settings, so bear with me, but I want you to close your eyes, and please no cheating here for just a second. I want you to close your eyes. Now I want you to imagine Mile High Stadium on a brisk Sunday afternoon, completely filled. Can you see all those 76,000 fans in the stands and the players on the field? Now imagine without a click, they're all sick. And then with a click, they're all gone. Keep your eyes closed for just a second. It's now Monday night. The Broncos playing, host on a worldwide television, Monday Night Football. You know how that goes. Mile High Stadium is jam-packed, 76,000 capacity. I'm missing football sometimes, but I'm still watching. And you hear the whole ABC thing, dun, 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 you know how the story starts, and then it happens again. They're all gone. So now open your eyes back to me if you can. Folks, that's just 76,000 people on a Sunday afternoon and a Monday night. And so that weighs heavily on an educator's mind. COVID-19 has taken out the stadium capacity more than 3 times over. And folks, it's kind of real. You know, I urge you, as well as I can't accept that as normal. So closer to home, in Colorado, the State Department of Public Health Environment tells us that as we, enter these weeks, that 240,000 cases have started, more than 14,000 people hospitalized, nearly 3,000 COVID-19 caused deaths, and more than 2,300 outbreaks. So now understand this, these facts and figures deal with the direct impact, and there are millions more that are obviously having indirect impacts. But there is also an added element for me and for all of our educational leaders, the mental and physical strain of it all. Again, I can speak to you about that personally, but I can also say that it is weighing heavily on everyone. And again, our educators are the heroes in this. So while educators in both public and private are trying to ensure that we still keep teaching the 3 R's, the reading, the writing, and the arithmetic, that's on our minds. And at our school, personally, our curriculum, our experiential learning, but think about educating like that and weighing those type of statistics each day. So you see, we are wanting to get through this and help our kids get through this mentally well too. And as a part of education during COVID times, as this is so poignantly kind of titled, that is where we are. We are trying to get through this mentally well, both our students, our faculty, our staff, and of course, other extended families, people who are just friends of the school. So we school leaders must seek to find a balance, and we are trying to draw boundaries in order to not suffer the supreme cost, right? The supreme cost to me is anxiety, depression, mental illness, alcoholism, extreme loneliness, and withdrawal from society. And not just for the students. I'm going to say that for all of us. Believe you me, there are professionals who are on the edge, many of whom are wondering if they should just withdraw from the profession altogether. And I know some school leaders who are flirting with all of the above. And all I can say is, but by the grace of God, go I. Through all of the chaos during the pandemic, and quite invisibly created the school leaders and you Rotarians and community leaders and supporters, you guys we all have a unique opportunity, of course, to just be able to stay connected to one another. Whether it's virtually, whether it's calling a friend or colleague and just saying, hey, I see you, I hear you, I feel you, and just trying to pour in someone else's cup. Because, there is that old adage, if life gives you lemons, you make lemonade or whatever. And I know that sounds rather simplistic, but sometimes in life, simple is best. Collectively, we have had the ability to learn how to better anchor ourselves as a school to our mission. And we have the opportunity to take this situation and improve how we manage our day-to-day lives, how we engage with others, how we set and choose our priorities. I have made it a habit to asking everyone, how are you? And not just that casual, how are you? And you're still leaving, but to wait for the answer and embrace the messiness of that answer. And so that's where I am. And I believe that we all have the opportunity to better learn from each other how to live, because no environment can be or will be 100% safe of the virus. And we can't expect our schools to do what our country, our world could not do, and that is to keep the virus out. If we're steady and consistent, we can see and take advantage of these opportunities to make change with our curriculum. We can innovate and ideate around practices, and we can execute our lessons differently, and we can support our teachers differently. We can support educators differently, and we can support children differently. So yeah, it is a tumultuous time, but I do believe we'll come out of it stronger. I believe this paradigm shift is one to help us live better. So our teachers should feel and should see and should hear your empathy and your compassion. They should know that you, the Rotarians and other community leaders and anyone in our community, that they care about what they do. Send the teacher a positive note. The whole adage of putting the apple on the teacher's desk. This pandemic has given us the time to show that what we're really, really made of. And the question will be, will we show what we're really made of, and what will that be? And so I want to thank you wholeheartedly for your time and for being able to come and speak here. I know that what I have presented about the pandemic can be altering a little bit in your mind, but what I know is that our educators will rise. They will rise from this, and I am super proud of being at the Colorado Springs School. And I do know that as I talk with educators from here and around the world, I have friends in different places around the world, and they are saying that although this is hard, this is challenging, and they are flirting with leaving the profession, it's in their heart, it's in their blood, it's in their DNA. And I do believe we're going to come out of this much, much better.